3 Lives 3 Worlds. The Pillow Book. Lower volume. Original work by Tanki Gongzi. English translation, Hamster 428. English editing, Rock Harlequin, Lily, Joanna Kuang. Part 3 Arania. Chapter 6. The wide river flowed east. This river was named Sing, and eastward was where the capital lay. Because they were coursing downstream this time around, the returning trip went much more smoothly. In only 3 or 4 days they had already reached Heartbreak Mountain. Mingzi Bay at Heartbreak Mountain. How could Fengju forget the companionship she and Zeiss had shared when they last saw Yueling blossoms there? Yet this was the 3rd day Zeiss hadn't shown himself since the night they spoke in her room. Fengju considered herself a conscientious person. After eating his fish and drinking his syrup, she had been wanting to express her gratitude in person. At the same time she wondered whether his condition had improved and if he had regained any of his senses. Not having seen him left her feeling a little regrettable. Thanks to Mo Xiao's care, Fengju ate then slept then ate, living comfortably for the past several days. Never mind the external injuries from Zhuge which had all healed. Recently she even gained a muffin top on her stomach. In the wake of this discovery, she sometimes pinched her stomach dolefully in addition to sleep and eat. Cha kept in mind what she saw. Her Highness seems to miss Prince Qing, she worriedly reported to Mo Xiao. She has been holding onto her stomach every day in endless sighing. She might have found out that Prince Qing has been sleeping ever since Lord Zeiss came to visit it. Knowing her affection for Prince Qing, she must be afraid I would blame myself, for she has restrained herself from asking me about his condition. I've been the one mainly responsible for Prince Qing, yet I ended up allowing such serious trouble to happen. Her eyes glistened with tears. Our kind princess is always thinking for others. Moi gazed outside the window and thought to himself, these days your happy princess has long forgotten whether Prince Qing was a scallion and which hillside he was grown from. She is only bemoaning the fat she gained. Yet from his mouth came these words, no wonder you are Arania's most trusted helper. Smart and clever as expected, and are able to see through her intention. If you already know what she wants, then follow her wishes, such is the duty of a loyal servant. If she doesn't ask you, she will certainly ask me, at which time I will give her the details. Soothed by the overwhelming praise, Cha expressed her gratitude and joyfully ran off, leaving Moi alone to his rumination. Daijun had acted with meticulousness and care. Before he left, he even remembered Fengju was afraid of snakes and took it upon himself to take care of Prince Qing. Poor Prince Qing! He wondered whether he would ever be able to wake up from this sleep. Moi sighed lamentably. In another cabin. Disappointed by the fire, the king had been irritated for days. Now he was sick of the continuous sailing. At this time, the rights official by his side forecast a sky filled with glittering stars tonight, and told him it was going to be a beautiful evening. His Majesty's interest immediately kindled upon hearing this. He ordered the rights officials to clean up the entertainment terrace on deck for a night banquet soon to commence. Fengju had no interest in these dinner parties, but for the past few days there were only 2 places she could visit, her room and the bow. There were only 2 people she could see, Cha and Moi. To and fro, back and forth, she was bored to tears. That was why for the first time ever she left to come to dinner early. By the time Shang Jun, his queen, and the two princesses followed the railings to mount the terrace, Fengju had already drunk 2 cups of tea, eaten 3 plates of sweets, and littered the floor with walnut peels. Changdi's eyes swept to spot her, a touch of malice and mockery flashed in them. Fengju calmly plopped half a cake into her mouth and pretended she didn't see her. Changdi preened herself prettily today. In her hands was a lyre, on her body was a white dress fluttering in the river wind, and on her face was meticulous makeup. But no matter how important a dinner is, it was still just a dinner. There was no need for a princess to perform music. At first, Fengju didn't really understand. Then she perked her ears and listened to the courtiers sitting in the distance. It turned out Lord Zeiss was apparently musically inclined. One of the courtiers even added mysteriously that Princess Changdi and Lord Zeiss were quite compatible in their interests. But up to the opening of the banquet, the musically inclined Lord Zeiss still did not appear, leaving a stiff-faced Changdi holding onto her lyre on stage like a block of stone. Fengju partly gloated in glee but also partly felt sorry for her. Nevertheless, Lord Zeiss proved to be a prized confection. Not only did Changdi miss his presence, even the queen asked after him. Once there was full attendance at the terrace and the opening dance came to a conclusion, the queen's moderate voice found its way to Fengju. "It has been several days since I last saw Zeiss. Shouldn't he have returned today? The banquet has started yet why do I still not see him?" Fengju listened to her words dazedly. While she hadn't seen Zeiss lately, she merely thought he wasn't on board and had gone somewhere. She didn't know when he had left, much less when he would be returning. For a moment, she didn't know how to lie and could only vaguely play along with the queen's words. "I'm afraid there might have been some delay on his way back, such thing isn't unusual. I'm dismayed to have burdened mother with this worry." There was a number of shrewd people at the terrace. Would she buy this ambiguous answer? In the steep and narrow Kongshan mountains are ferocious beasts guarding the soul preserver herb, interjected Changdi, all of a sudden. If gathering these herbs for Junyojija ends up causing his lordship harm, I think I must apologize to Aranyajija. I assume because his lordship had left in a hurry, he hadn't had time to bid you goodbye. You must not know his whereabouts. Then turning to the queen, she said, "It was I who requested his lordship to retrieve Huangko from Kongshan. I was worried for Junyojija, for fear she had suffered a shock the night of the fire and agitated her health. After saying he will grant my wish because I rarely ask for something from him, he left the next day. But I'm now beginning to worry seeing that his lordship hasn't come back yet. It seems I might have been wrong in asking him to go." The queen looked to Changdi in surprise. Fengju was also a bit shocked. In the distance came Su Moi's voice. "Zeiss has not met with the two sisters after we boarded the ship, don't listen to her folly." Amusedly turning the cup in her hand, Fengju watched Changdi feign a look of concern and bashfulness in her eyes. Things were becoming a tad interesting. Although she had always been slow, as a child she had often conspired with her aunt to deceive her father, and thus she was only too familiar with what was happening. She knew well all these twists and turns. When Mo Sha remarked Changdi was speaking careless folly, he signified she was harboring a motive. And what was Changdi's great motive? Her words plainly insinuated there was some discord between Lord Zeiss and Aranya, and that their bond wasn't comparable to the affection he held for Junyo and Changdi. To sing about this sort of petty jealousy under the table was fine as an amusing tale. Bellowing it on the table, however, couldn't really be considered a pleasant display. But if she were to say that Changdi had delivered the speech just to anger her, then she wasn't quite that stupid. Fengju ruminated a while when she suddenly recalled the words of the young courtier moments ago. She at once grasped the situation. From Changdi's words and actions, it seemed she was really desperate to marry Zeiss and had thus planned this. Marrying off two princesses to one man was not unprecedented. Zeiss seemed to have feelings for Junyo, but Junyo wasn't Shang Jun's biological daughter. Furthermore, she was said to be engaged to Chen Yat. Although they liked each other, it was nothing more than a short affair and it would never work out. Besides, Changdi's feelings for Zeiss did not develop in a day or two. With her personality, she must have already pleaded to the king. Either the king hadn't brought it up to Zeiss or he had but was rejected. Although Zeiss had retired from his post, his ties to Qinan Palace were centuries old. Compared to Chen Yat, his name was more reputable. Since the king had always respected him, he of course wanted his support. What could one do to wed Zeiss? Compromising oneself was the fastest way. Perhaps Zeiss had always been cautious, hence Changdi couldn't yet accomplish her plan. As a last resort, she was going to compromise herself in front of everyone. The clever thing about this plan was that Zeiss wasn't here. He'd have to clarify his innocence after hearing about it at a later time. But clarifying one's innocence was a meaningless endeavor unless it was done on sight. Clarifying after the fact would only make it seem as though he was trying to cover his tail. When subsequent talks became more intense and subjected Changdi and Zeiss to tumultuous gossips, for her reputation the king would naturally find ways to betroth her to Zeiss. In the face of these clever tactics, the only thing Fengju could do was to concede her deepest admiration. Even though the seated bunch of minions would be following the king's will, they all looked at her sympathetically with knowing eyes. But compared to the trouble of Zeiss asking to share the same room and bed one day, his marrying Changdi, no matter what, was actually a good thing. Fengju's heart sang with music. If one paid attention to minute details, indeed she had lost some face. But if one were to look at the bigger picture, this plan of Changdi's had actually paved for her a bright open road. She also didn't need to take part in this relationship. Certainly capital, excellent splendid plan, congratulations, well done haha. After a slew of words from Changdi, quite a few whisperings started to make their way around the tables. But everyone present was smart enough. No matter how they felt inside, their facades were natural and easy, tranquil and calm. As Fengju expected, the king did not agree with this. Following Changdi's confession, he only lightly said, what could a mere Shuikong mountain do to Zeiss? Didn't he hear that the royal physicians have something precious to present? With a few simple words, he had instantaneously diverted the conversation. At a glance, an old doctor promptly stood up and reported back that there was surely a treasure to be presented. The old doctor hunched over in obeisance and said, I once heard your majesty mention that there is some algidity in the three princesses' constitutions. I happened across a few hibeguas today. These fruits must be consumed during the vernal equinox to be at their most effectiveness. I had instructed the apprentice to stew them into a porridge as treatment for the princess's algid condition. Your Majesty, should I present them immediately? Whilst the king nodded, on the wooden stairs came the clickety-clack of steady steps. Another voice timely drifted into the seating arena, Hyebaegyo? Presently Aranya cannot have this fruit. Fengju turned around. On the stairs emerged a body from the waist up. Didn't this proper purple-robed and silver-haired appearance belong to Zai Shenjun, who hadn't shown up for several days, the sweet confection who was dissected on the table just now? The entire party panned their eyes to the source of the voice. Green mountains hid in the distance, wind glided on the water. A cloak was seen hanging on Lord Zai's arm, weary dusts of a long journey were detected on his body, but not the slightest urgency was shown on his face. With utter calm and leisure, he stood firmly on the terrace and lightly greeted the monarchs. Then he unhurriedly came beside Fengju, placed a container of soup on the table, slid the cloak on his arm over her head and said, "Coastal wind is drafty, why didn't you know to put some clothes on when you went out?" Before Fengju could poke her head out from the cloak, Lord Zais took the opportunity to sit down, picked up the teacup in front of her, raised it to his lips and downed it in one swig. Around them, a few indistinct gasps were let out. Fengju managed to poke her head out from behind the cloak and saw the cup on Zai's lips. A boom went off in her head as she came to realize why there were sounds of gasping. She quickly extended a hand to block him. "Stop, good sir. That's my cup." Zais turned his head, looking rather puzzled. "What difference does it make when what's yours is mine?" Fengju's head again pounded loudly. Avoiding the gaze of others, she covered one side of her face and sincerely asked, "Hey, did you take the wrong meds? You have never been this way before." Zais paused for a brief second, then concisely said, "That's because I took the wrong meds before." Next, he poured out a hot bowl of soup and handed it to her. "Here, drink this." Today Lord Zais was altogether unpredictable from words to actions. Fengju simply could not make him out. She took the soup in puzzlement. "What is this? Did you make it?" She took a whiff, then said with praise, "You actually spend time in the kitchen, too? I would have never thought. I reserve the highest admiration for those who go into the kitchen. Let us exchange ideas one of these days." The cup shook in Zai's hand, but with an unchanging expression he replied, "I went to the kitchen to watch Cha-Cha cook." Because it wasn't a formal dinner, the atmosphere was unrestrictive. The musicians' string and woodwind notes soared from behind the curtains. Conversations ensued among seated guests. No one noticed Fengju and company's unexpected exchange at this table. Regardless, Changdi had previously paved the way for men's gossips. "A line from you. Last time I borrowed a commentary book from you and saw your exceptional annotations. Indeed, your every word has my admiration." "A line from me? How can my meager rustic knowledge compare to yours? I dare not claim that I am learned from knowing a few scant words, lest I become a joke to you." They appeared as though they were enjoying small talks and lively drinks, but in reality both eyes and ears were entirely directed in the direction of the Xi Feng couple's table. Since Zais had trekked a long distance to come back to the banquet, the king should naturally drop a caring word or two. He looked to Zais, then with a rare concern said two lines to Aranya. Zais said presently, "You cannot have Hyebaegyo, but why is that?" "Why? How would she possibly know?" She looked to Zais and ventured, "Because it's good stuff, maybe? Since Junyo is sick she should have more, and so I can't have any? In honesty, She intended to explain since she was big-hearted. She didn't really care whether they let her eat that fruit or not. She hadn't yet begun when she was cut off by Zeiss. She is using Huanco. Huanco and Hibiguo are pharmacologically incompatible. She would not be able to withstand it. Fengju thought to herself, if you are on Junyo's side, just stay on Junyo's side. I haven't said a thing, why start this poppycock? Her absorption caused her to be careless and she ended up blurting, I don't remember ever taking Huanco. Zeiss looked at her and prodded his chin, it's in your soup, no. Fengju looked to the bowl confusedly, isn't this fish soup with ginger? Zeiss glanced at her while scooping out 2 pieces of ginger. Huanco grows in extremely shaded areas, hence its strong odor. He hadn't finished when the culinary proficient Fengju seemed to have understood. Oh, so for this dish you first used the flavor of fish to mask the flavor of Huanco, then you used ginger to get rid of the fishy smell? That's quite ingenious, but there's also another method I would like to discuss with you. Though the herb is strong, I think the savor of mutton would likewise be able to subdue it. Zeiss appeared to agree. We'll try that next time. Cha Cha, who stood at their side, could not help but to chime in, Your Highnesses, this isn't cuisine. The buzzing crowd at the terrace gradually settled down into hushed silence. The 2 princesses Junyo and Changdi wore an ashen complexion on their faces while the courtiers below bowed their heads and exchanged looks. At length, the contemplative king broke the silence when he turned to Zeiss and said, that is to say you didn't pick Huanco for Junyo. Fengju's head felt heavy. She had forgotten all about that. This meant she hadn't seen Zeiss in recent days because he had ventured to the high mountains only to retrieve Huanco for her. What virtue and talent did she have to burden him to care for her like this? Even if they were spouses in name and he was adhering to his responsibility, he was quite dedicated to have taken it this far, really exemplary. Fengju's mind was racing at random, her eyes also darting at random. She saw Zeiss glancing to Junyo, then sweeping back to the host. The look on his face was indecipherable. If not for Arania, why would I make that long and dangerous trip to Kongshan? He considered for a second, then said, the queen did ask me to look into the eldest princess's condition. In my opinion the elder princess is doing fine and has no need for my attending. Not looking after Arania on the other hand will cause me some worriment. Fengju choked on the tea in her throat. That's just crazy talk. It's obvious you have always been distant toward me. Have you taken the wrong meds? Zeiss leaned over and helped pat her back. He took a good while, then unhurriedly said, Oh, that's because I don't often come down to the palace, but you didn't come to see me. Fengju couldn't figure out this logic. She instinctively faulted his words, it's you who didn't come to see me? Okay. Zeiss briefly frowned as he thought for a moment on how to respond to this. He sincerely fibbed, I did come to look for you, but you never noticed me. You only stayed with your teacher from morning till night. To be honest, I deliberately ignored you because I was jealous. Sir Moi reacted quickly and said in haste, Your lordship, you can't accuse the innocent like that. Fengju was too dumbfounded to say anything. What Zeiss said, what Sir Moi said, and what the king said thereafter, because her brain was addled by anger, she completely did not catch. She didn't even notice at what time the dinner came to an end. By the time her mind came back, on the terrace remained only her and Sumoy. A cool burst of river wind passed them. Fengju shivered and said to Sumoy, "Mo Xiao, do you feel that today's eyes is a little, I don't know how to put it into words." Sumoy laughed out loud. "He makes you feel a little familiar." Familiar? Fengju was made to see with Sumoy's small pointer. There were times when Zei's gave off the feeling that, if Donghua Daijun had fortuitously come here, they would be the best of mates. If that happened, Lord Liansong would likely have to give up the seat of being Daijun's best friend. In the event Daijun no longer looked for Liansong for drinks and chess, wouldn't Liansong be very lonely? Might he cry? Ah, that's not true, Liansong could always look for Sumoy. It seemed without women, they could still pass time in blithesome peace. It was already the end of the pig hour, 11 p.m., by the time she crawled into bed. Owing to Huangko, Fengju had a restful sleep that night. Early next morning she perplexedly found a new chaise longue placed in front of her bed. When Cha-Cha was called over, she related that Lord Zeiss had spent the night in this small chamber and had risen from bed to go to the kitchen since before dawn. It seemed he was learning to make porridge with a few apprentice cooks. Not having sat firmly, Fengju fell straight down from her bed. Cha-Cha said in shyness, "Are your highness upset that while his lordship had stayed in your cabin, he had set up a separate couch?" She blushed. Cha-Cha also had this question but later came to understand that his lordship was being considerate of your recovering health. He placed a separate couch not wanting to share the same bed with you, not because he doesn't want to consummate your marriage. On the ground, a row of cold sweat condensed on Fengju's temple. Help me up first," she told Cha-Cha with a shaking voice. Consummation. Fengju didn't really understand this consummation matter, and her unreliable mother and aunt had never explained it to her either. But she vaguely knew it was something horrific. What Zeiss ultimately had in mind, there was simply no way to predict. In this situation, perhaps the only thing she could do was to look for the almighty Sumoy and consult some countermeasures with him. But first, she must fill her stomach before looking for Mo Xiao. A full stomach was the most important regardless of what one was trying to accomplish. Mo Xiao seemed to have read her mind today, however. After washing and before food could be put on the table, Mo Xiao had already appeared in her small cabin. Humor was evident on his face. "Why was there a letter in my room early this morning asking me to come by? You even wanted to speak with me in the privacy of your room. Aren't you afraid of Lord Zei's jealousy?" This situation, this scene, they were making Fengju's head spin. Not long ago, she had been excited at the thought of savory porridge, but for some reason, her mind began to feel foggy the moment she saw Sumoy come into the room. She vaguely heard Mo Xiao mention something about a letter in his room. She didn't leave any letter in his room, much less inviting him into her own. But right now as she looked at him, all she felt was that the man in front of her was very handsome. He was the one whom she had spent thousands of years searching for, all the way from pure celestial realms down to murky mortal streets. She had toiled so much all because of him. Seeing Fengju staring at him motionlessly while her eyes were slowly giving birth to a different kind of look, Sumoy's smile gradually died from his face. He only managed to ask, "What's wrong?" before the young girl had flung herself at him. She firmly clung to him in an embrace as her arms tightly encircled his neck. Even if this wasn't real, it was Aranya's face, Aranya's body, and Aranya's breath grazing by his ear. On the main ship, Changdi sat down across from Junyo. Being a little anxious, she asked Junyo for the 5th time, "Jija, isn't it almost time?" Junyo reached for and unhurriedly tipped over the steaming teapot. She then gave her a glance and said, "What's the hurry? Like brewing tea, there needs to be suitable heat and appropriate timing. Too fast or too soon, neither will do." Changdi scoffed and stood up. It was difficult enough to drug them with a lovesick potion. "I'm feeling uneasy. I don't know why Lord Zeiss is treating Aranya differently these days. I cannot wait. When he sees the person whom he treats differently in an entangling state with someone else, I wonder how he might look." She sneered, and Aranya, never mind that father doesn't like her to begin with, even if he had loved her to the rim of his heart, he would no longer be able to tolerate her with as great a sin as adultery. Junyo leisurely returned the teaware back to its original place. "That is of course. We have to push her to the depths so she can never rise again from the land of death. This time our strike must be neat and swift." She rose with a smile. "It's almost time. Last night when she slathered our faces, it was in front of a large crowd. How can we show up by ourselves today?" When they pushed their way out the door, on the Sicing River were rolling whitecaps. Blue sky and bright daylight reigned outside the small boat. Inside, romantic curtains hung high. A few days ago, Cha-Cha had replaced the bed curtains for something thicker. When the curtains were down, they could keep the morning light out. The bed curtains were now in disarray. A disheveled young man was lying in bed. Pinning down his hands was a young woman in skin-cladding gossamer thin fabric, her dress slipping off one feminine shoulder. She cast her mesmerized eyes onto his body, all while straddling him and baring her baby-soft porcelain ankles to view. Spring was blooming behind the curtains. Was this not what they called erotic amour? Fengju dazedly looked at the man lying underneath her. She was extremely confused. What exactly was she doing, and what was she supposed to do next? The person beneath was rather quiet. His gaze lingered on her face for a moment as though he was contemplating something. Dragging to bed, stripping off clothes, pushing down, lying on top. Fengju didn't understand him. The young man looked at her with stilled eyes. These 4 steps were done quite adeptly, he seemed to sigh, but I don't remember ever teaching you this. Where did you learn it? Fengju was surprised to see the forever regal man being held captive underneath her and even sighing in such a way. In his eyes was her reflection, shining like the soft starlight on a cold night. There existed coldness yet also warmth. She lowered down to lay a kiss on his eyes and felt his trembling lashes. This was so very interesting. From books, she foggily answered him. In books are jade-like beauties, in books are houses of gold, you can find everything in books. Does that book tell you what to do next? The man's voice was very low. If one wasn't near him, one almost couldn't hear. She slightly moved away from him to watch his face and nodded her head. It does. Many, many things, in fact, that she seemed to not recall them clearly. Since she couldn't think clearly, she was too lazy to think clearly. She just instinctively wanted to be closer to the man underneath her. The next step is to blow out the light, after that would be the morning after, she told him in all seriousness. Then she was suddenly confused, but where is the light? The young man maintained his vulnerable pose, having both hands pinned down by her. He gazed at her a while, then at last said, "I think something was left out when you read that book." Fengju mumbled, "It was Auntie who gave me the book, I'm sure nothing was cut out," all the while looking around to see whether there was a light near their bed. Then she thought and felt perhaps even a book given to her from Auntie might not have been complete. She curiously asked, "Which part are you saying was left out?" "I can't tell you right now." His eyes were somewhat clouded. As he spoke, his undulating Adam's apple caught Fengju's eyes. She never paid serious attention to these spots before because she had never been this close to him. Or perhaps there had been times when they were this close in the past, she just didn't have the guts she had today. She wasn't interested in what was left out of the book anymore. She uttered an evasive response, released one of the man's hands, moved toward his neckline, and tugged open the restrictive lapels. Her hand paused slightly. The open neckline revealed a beautiful clavicle, and a light lit up in her eyes. The man didn't offer any resistance, he indifferently left her to her will. She carefully stroked him, then after caressing a while, she quite enviously said, "Collarbone, this I don't have. I had wished for a beautiful collarbone every year when I was young," she ruefully told him, "but in the end I still have none. Mother said I was a little chubby so my collarbone was hidden away, but there had really been one." As she spoke she brought her hand to the flesh where her collarbone supposedly hid to show the young man. She froze when she reached it, sneezed, and said, "It seems I do have one." He clearly could only move one hand, but the young man dragged the quilt quite easily and steadily raised it to drape around her shoulders. With eyes still clouded, he explained to her, "That's because this isn't your own body. But even on your own body, we can still vaguely make out the shape of your collarbone." His movement gaped the lapels wider, exposing a pale scar beneath the collarbone, one which looked like some sort of knife wound. It was a sentence without rhyme or reason, one which Fengju did not understand. She only brought her hand to touch that scar, blinked, then carefully caressed it and asked, "Does it still hurt?" The man stiffened. He tilted his head, it was obviously an old wound from long ago, but he casually gave off a groan, "A bit." Fengju carefully kneeled down. She pressed her scarlet lips onto the scar, remained there for a while, then slipped her tongue out to lick it, her teeth inadvertently grazing the collarbone. When the man suppressed a groan, Fengju asked concernedly, "It still hurt even after coated with saliva?" The man played along with her words, his emotion inscrutable, "It could be because new wounds have formed." Fengju neared the man's neckline and searched for half a day, finding only teeth marks at his clavicle. She brushed them with her fingertip, raised her head slightly, and with her lips by his ears, asked in a pliable voice, "Is it here? Then let me lick it again for you." Before she could finish her words, she somehow found herself now under him. Fengju widened her eyes confusedly as she looked at the handsome man before her eyes. He held her hands and trapped her under his body. The quilt that was originally on her now assuredly rested on his shoulders, under the cover was a perfectly silent world. She didn't think she had used very much force to push down on him just now, nor did she subject him to this confining pressure which was making her unable to move, but she also did not want to resist. The young man calmly stared at her, his breath almost audible. She could tell his breathing wasn't as calm as his expression let on. He was looking at her, but it seemed as though he was looking at someone else. Her reflection which was in his eyes also looked to be someone else's. She tilted her head and curiously asked him, "What are you thinking about?" A short suspension. "I might be thinking that I want to quickly switch the two of you back." She didn't know what he meant in the latter part, but insisted on understanding. With the same pliable voice, she asked, "Why might? Was your mind blank just now?" Noting the man's brief moment of palpitation, she writhed her wrists and said, "Are you tired?" "I feel a little cold, why don't you lie back down?" The two princesses Junyo and Changdi led a team of maids and broke into the small cabin. Floating out from behind the heavy bed draperies were silky whispering words, "I'm a little cold, why don't you lie down?" A subsequent faint gasp or two instantly created an amorous atmosphere in the small room. The two princesses looked at each other and chuckled in delight. They came just in time. But there were techniques in catching an affair. One could either use words, or one could use force. To use words meant to use formality. From outside the curtains, they would cite heaven and earth and moralities to guide the pair of trembling lovebirds out from behind the curtains and admit to their own guilt. To use force meant they would be wielding weaponry. With a cane, they would strike mercilessly at the lovebirds in bed. Of course, catching the adulterers with force would grant them more gratification, but the two princesses didn't have faith they could beat Sumoy. Furthermore, what decency was there in unmarried ladies disturbing others' bed in broad daylight? They thus could only regrettably pick the previous approach. In front of the bed lay a white brocade robe askew, a black belt flung haphazardly nearby. Aha! Here lay the pretext. Changdi hooked a sleeve with her finger and assumed uncertainty on her face. "Isn't this Mr. Mo's garment?" Then she proceeded to look startled. Could it be Mr. Mo behind the curtains? Now she looked as though she was completely ashamed with indignation. "Aranya, come out. How can you be so brazen in broad daylight, engaging in such imprudence with your teacher? Even the ants can boast to have a better sense of shame than you. What have you done to the royal family's name this time?" Changdi performed the villain remarkably well, and Junyo immediately joined in. She told the maid beside her, Go and ask father, mother, and Lord Zai's here. Tell them there's an important matter which requires their urgent presence. We came wanting to check on Aranya Mimi's health, we didn't know we would run into this. I myself don't know what to do right now." As the two princesses harmonized their melodies, the delegated maids also anxiously left the cabin like sprinting rabbits. One look could tell they were well-trained servants. The small boat had long had people stationed all around it. At this point, the two people hiding in bed were akin to two turtles trapped in an urn. A large group of female officials stood beyond the bed draperies with guarding eyes. All they were waiting for was the arrival of the monarchs and Zais. This show happened to be well staged. With the dragon ship ahead and Fengju's small boat slightly behind, the distance between them were merely measured by a few steps. Combined with Junyo's clever arrangement, from the time Shang Jun stepped onto the boat to the moment he entered the cabin was but an instant's length. Behind the tightly concealed bed came rustling sounds of fabrics. Because the two princesses were too busy kneeling down to put on a show for the king outside, they had not noticed these frictional sounds, and thus did not feel cause for urgency. Junyo was talented, Changdi was even more so. Just a moment ago she was still frothing at the mouth with excessive lies and could not wait to crucify Aranya on the spot, but Shang Jun's toes had barely come into the cabin when the silver blade in her mouth instantly turned into distressing plea. In prostration, she professed alarming His Majesty was all she could do in the face of discovering Aranya and Sumoy in a clandestine affair. They had disregarded the morals binding a teacher-student relationship and were in bed together at this very moment. As unmarried ladies of virtue, she and Junyo had felt shocked when they encountered this matter, and they hadn't known what to do. On and on she went. Because each step and detail of this play was going in Changdi's way, she had a fine time acting. Raising her head, she saw Shang Jun facing the bed with eyes full of anger. It felt as though gloomy clouds were bearing down on the tiny space, it satisfied her so. With this sense of satisfaction, she glanced to Shang Jun again, and saw that he was looking behind her, but his monstrous anger had dissolved away like a clay ox dissolving in water, turning instead into surprise. Curious, Changdi couldn't help herself from turning around. She took one look and her body went soft, threatening to keel onto the ground. Behind them, the curtains had been lifted to the side. Aranya was lying in bed. Sitting on the outer edge was a silver-haired man who was unhurriedly slipping on his shoes, but he wasn't Sumoy. Although he was not wearing his trademark purple robe, but rather a pure simple white one, the man who was leisurely putting on his shoes, the one they kept saying was an adulterer, was actually and plainly the husband whom Aranya had legitimately married, Zai Shenjun. The cabin was momentarily enveloped in a deathly silence. The king glanced sideways at Junyo, one could not guess what mood he was in. The maids lowered their eyes and filed into two lines, they did not as much as dare to exhale. Those standing farther away boldly whispered their thoughts in mind. Their masters in the past had privately ridiculed Her Highness the Second Princess. They said she did not deserve the position of the Archmage Lady as she could not win the favor of his lordship. Now the sun had risen so high, and the Archmage had only gotten out of bed, then didn't this mean the second princess had won his lordship's affections? Because he just woke up, Lord Zai's silver hair was a bit messy. Although his clothes were neat on the surface, the closed lapels were not as restrictively tight as ordinary days. When the morning light sprinkled in, he made a most remarkable picture. The picture was beautiful, but the atmosphere in this small cabin was quite oppressive. His lordship was also silent. After putting on his shoes, he didn't care to look at the roomful of the people. He turned around to the damask quilt and wrapped it around Fengju who was sitting on the bed. He then lightly carried her up and took the path next to the wall screen, slightly giving a nod to the king, too noisy. Excuse us. Shang Jun glared at Changdi and Junyo who were prostrated on the ground. Even as the clan's head, he really did not know what to say given this scenario. He dazedly nodded back and said, "After I investigate this matter, I promise to give you a clear explanation." These words carried in them a self-humbling sense having been spoken by the clan's head. Unexpectedly, Changdi with her pallid complexion suddenly hissed, "He is not Zai's, he has to be Sumoy's transformation." Because he knows he cannot hide his scandal with Aranya, he resorted to this desperate measure. Sumoi's sorcery is powerful, you may not be able to see through it, but you must believe me. The king's expression had changed several times throughout all of this. He shouted with a deep growl, "Silence!" Frightened, Changdi took a step back and bit her lips. The cabin went dead silent momentarily. The only sounds remained were those of Zai's dying footsteps as he carried Arania away. Changdi lowered her head and dug her nails into her palms, leaving several deep imprints. How dare the fake Zais ignore her words? The king seemed a little tired. After staying in reticence for a while, he suddenly spoke toward the hatchway, "Why have you also come here?" Changdi immediately looked up in disbelief. Her body went soft, almost as if she couldn't even remain kneeling. Never in her wildest imagination did she expect a white-robed Sumoi to be standing at the cabin door holding a jasper flute in his hand. Why was it Sumoi? Mo Xiao's elegant form stood at the hatchway. On his face was a proper smile. He gave Shang Jun a proper greeting, all while he was inwardly swearing proper curses. Dai Jun, how did they ever think to maneuver Dai Jun? His Eminence had obviously plotted this entire comical play. Then at the end, he made a speedy escape and pushed him out to sing the finale instead. That old fogey! He was swearing inside, but a smile nevertheless surfaced on the outside as he raised his voice to say, "I didn't expect your Majesty to also be here. Early this morning, I received a letter addressed from Arania inviting me to meet her in her cabin at the end of the Dragon Hour, 9 a.m. But I was the one who taught Arania her handwriting. Others may not recognize if it's her handwriting or not, but I can still make a differentiation. For this reason I thought to choose a more respectable hour to come see her. I did not think I would be meeting your Majesty and the two princesses who would also come to visit Arania. My timing is ill, indeed." When his words landed, even an idiot might have guessed what the circumstances involving the brouhaha in Arania's room were today. Panic emerged on Changdi's face. She went down on her knees and held onto Shang Jun's leg. "Father, don't believe him. He's lying." Sumoi seemed to not follow. "Princess, you shouldn't accuse me of speaking lies. I still kept part of the letter and its unknown handwriting as evidence." Changdi's originally blanched face instantaneously turned livid. She looked to Junyo for help. Junyo only bowed in silence, her hands hidden in her sleeves. Her body seemed as if it was bound tightly. Shang Jun's furious eyes shifted from Junyo to Changdi, then back to Junyo. In a rumbling voice, he ordered, "Men, bring the two princesses back to their rooms. They're not allowed to take one step out the door without my prior approval." The king walked away in a huff. His ire did not appear to be mild. Whether Arania's affair with Sumoi was true, or Junyo and Changdi had framed Arania and Sumoi, the shame was all in the family. If he hadn't known, then it wouldn't matter at all. Unfortunately, his two foolish daughters had maneuvered him into their chess game and brought it to his attention. Covering up this matter wasn't difficult, it was how to appease Zais and keep his face that was the troubling matter. This ordeal was giving him quite a headache. Sumoi gazed after the female officials following the departing king. He lightly weighed the flute in his hand, his smile slowly fading. Moments ago, Changdi hadn't chosen her words in panic and had accused him of uttering lies. After using nonsense to counter nonsense, he indeed had lied. They had put in a significant effort to imitate Arania's handwriting. Even he was fooled. He even carried the letter and went to meet with Fengju. Only until she flung herself around him did he sense that something was amiss and that she seemed to be under some sort of witchery. He'd held a deep affection for Aranya. It was exactly because of this deep affection that he did not mistake Fengju for her for even one moment. But if he hadn't learned the mystification sorcery himself, he might have been dragged into this play as intended by Junyo and Changdi. Once he recognized that it was a setup, the most imperative thing to do was of course to find Daijun in the kitchen. He had originally wanted to switch places with Daijun and let their foiled plan be a lesson to those two. Daijun was standing in front of a small stove at the time, listening to his plan. The hand which normally held Buddhist sutras was then holding a wooden spoon. He slowly stirred the thick porridge on the stove and asked, "Because they are women, you are unable to pull the trigger? Do you still remember how to write the word tidy?" When Daijun said these words, the unfathomable expression on his face had been exceptionally calm, and his voice had given him chills. He had heard Daijun was one to act with quick precision, but those cases had all been related to the Six Realms' critical issues. Today's matter could only be regarded as trivial domestic affair. He wanted to see how Daijun would go about tidying things swiftly. Daijun hadn't done much. He only lured the two princesses into inviting the king to enter the cabin and lift the curtains. Nonetheless, the lifting of the curtains had enlightened him quite a bit. If Daijun had lifted the curtains from the front, at most the two princesses would only be deflated. With this identity, and without throwing away Shang Jun's face, Daijun couldn't really punish the two princesses. But if the curtains were lifted from behind, Shang Jun would need to appease to him by personally teaching his two ignorant daughters. Compared to the first approach, this one could make both princesses learn their lessons without any effort on Daijun's part. It was as tidy as could be. The furniture in the small cabin was now illuminated by the bright morning light. Sumoy glanced askance at the untidy bed and slightly raised an eyebrow. No wonder when he saw Daijun, he wasn't as furious as he had been in the kitchen. This was because the two princesses had inadvertently planted for him a lush willow, allowing His Majesty a jolly day of fun. End of Chapter 6.